I enjoy video production for a lot of reasons. Probably the first is there are so many gifted people who, when you put them all together and you collaborate on something, I think there's magic in it, there's art in it, and I think there's something special about that kind of camaraderie and that creative talent all coming together for a common goal, and I think it's pretty amazing.
I think it's one of the most collaborative things you can do, and I think typically you get to work with like a great group of people, and when a film crew is all working together, it can be amazing what you can accomplish.
I enjoy being around the crew. I like the production process. I like telling stories using video. I like the editorial side of things and how you can take footage and tell one story with it or tell a completely different story with it.
It provides a wonderful variety of different people, different places, different subject matter. It ceases to be a mundane job.
I never get bored. I find myself challenged quite a bit. I have to stay current. And there are just a bunch of crazy people in this industry that entertain me quite a bit.
The planning, that kind of problem-solving, puzzling part of putting the pieces together, from the director, the production designer, the location manager, putting together the right people for each project to flesh it out the best. And then I always say if I've done my job well, then I can stand back and watch the process function and unfold and come together.
I went to school at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I graduated in '93, and I was not in the film school. I was actually a journalism major, but I took a lot of film classes and I made a few student films there. After I graduated from undergrad, I found myself still in touch with some of the kids still at CU Boulder Film School, and I was asked to help out on a small film on Oppenheimer, the infamous nuclear physicist that was responsible for the atom bomb. And so his student film involved a road trip down to various locations in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. And when you shoot independent films like that, you don't really, you start with one role and you take on many more. So I was operating the camera, I was loading film, I was a props master, I was a bit of a mechanic in trying to get my buddy's car off the side of the road when we broke down. And so it's an interesting thing when you're in a no-budget independent film like that, and you're pretty much doing everything.
I went to college for graphic design and advertising until I realized that I was terrible at it and I didn't enjoy it. So I took the rest of my academics and said, well, what can I do with these? And I sort of wove my way through production and a lot of taking jobs, and they'd say, do you know how to work a camera? I'm like, yeah. Then you go home and you look it up. You're like, how do I work this camera? And you just figure it out. When I was starting out, there was a lot less security on film sets and things. So I would sneak onto productions and make myself invaluable. I would just find the person who needed the most help, and they would turn around and go, do you work for us anyway? Blah, 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 blah. I need the red hat instead of the yellow hat. I need a cup of coffee. And I would stand there and I would watch, and that's how I would learn. I've never officially worked on a film set, but I have been on many film sets.
So I actually went to school for broadcast journalism, and I kind of quickly found out that I didn't want to go down the route of being in a newsroom every day, and kind of wanted to expand my creative horizons. And so I kind of decided to take a really entry-level junior producer position, and and one of the things that I think kind of helped me was being mentored by some really great producers. And as I got kind of involved in it, I kind of really grew to love being a director and being a producer and writing and that creative process. And so that's kind of how I jumped into it and have been in it ever since.
Honestly, I think that I learned more my first 4 months here at Crosspoint than I learned in 4 years in my undergrad. And that's mostly because in the education environment, you're required to do so many other things, whereas here it's just about production and post-production. And I think that education can be valuable as far as broadening your knowledge, but as far as knowing the nuts and bolts of what it really takes to do a professional production and post, there's nothing like getting your hands dirty, grabbing a camera and editing something. I think that given the accessibility to the tools and to the software, I think one of the best things you can do is actually go shoot something, edit it, sweeten it, put some color on it, and put together a story. And I think that you learn a lot more hands-on than is possible to learn in the classroom.
Any kind of education you can get as a filmmaker is great. I don't think that college will provide a complete education as much as like any sort of academic learning isn't going to maybe give you a complete set of skills. But it can be a massive foundation, and I think it's really hard when you're like in a professional environment to be forced into a situation maybe you're not quite as comfortable yet with. But like in film school, you're able to push those boundaries a little bit more fearlessly, and I think that's super important. I think too, if you can find a way to mix that with a little bit of professional work and ultimately just shoot and be on set and edit and do as much as possible, you'll have a really well-rounded education.
I think most people consider the traditional route to get into the film industry being film school. And it's definitely a common route, but I would say that it's no more common than people kind of stumbling into filmmaking through other creative avenues. And in my experience, working at Industrial Light and Magic with the likes of George Lucas and people like that, that people come from many different backgrounds, which I think is what keeps it dynamic and alive. If everybody came from a similar background, we wouldn't have the diversity of opinion and perspective that you need to really create. I've worked on, I would say, maybe 15 feature-length films, and love the work, the camaraderie that we have in a longer project. One feature film that I worked on, at least in a limited capacity, was Star Wars Episode 1. I produced the battleground sequence in Tatooine for George Lucas as a case study in how to do the CG work that they were doing with the armies that battled in Tatooine. Here at Futuristic, the projects that we do and the turnaround is, instead of a year and a half, is 3 weeks. So the schedules are very different. For
what we like to do and what I like to do, it's like we want people like a lighting crew, props, wardrobe, makeup. If we're casting, we want to make sure that we find like the best talent. Sometimes that means going to different markets, like casting in LA or reaching out to different communities. I've been fortunate enough to have shot in countries all around the world: Italy, Iceland, Ireland, Germany, all over the world, which has been part of the experience of filmmaking. And what it's given me in my life is a chance to travel and do what I love, see places in a way that no tourist ever sees them, and find myself at some points kind of pinching myself and going, somebody's paying me to do this. So it's been pretty magical.
What I like about the industry is it certainly is the thing to be in these days, because everything revolves around television, revolves around video, revolves around networking, and I happen to be in the middle of that kind of thing that basically is a medium that is used to communicate information and messaging to people throughout the world. The thing about video production is you have so many pieces and so many things it takes to produce a piece. Ultimately, you've increased the odds for things to go wrong. Sometimes circuits blow because you've got too much power, you're pulling for the lights. Sometimes some people don't show up, and you've got to scramble to try and fill that position on the team when you hadn't planned to do that. And all this stuff is downtime, unfortunately, and winds up costing a lot of time and a lot more money.
I love being the problem solver. It's a little heroic sometimes. When you're on a shoot and you're like, oh, we forgot to cast all the kids on this shoot. Camera rolls in half an hour, what are we gonna do? And my job is to find kids to be in the shoot, or put out little production fires.
People ask me all the time how it's possible that I've been here for 23 years, and in all honesty, it's because I really enjoy the work. I love being in this industry, and I think that it's hard to find that kind of career where you can show up to work one day and it can be something completely new, and that keeps it exciting and keeps me showing up.
I think the things that have led to the greatest success throughout my career are the fact that I love what I do. And therefore I work really hard, and I'm constantly challenging myself to be as good at what I do as I can possibly be.
I would say being excited by filmmaking makes you still willing to learn. So if you can kind of go into every project looking to do something better, to learn something new, to keep things fresh, I think that you're gonna always be heading in the right direction.
You know, if you're just kind of first starting out in your career, the key is to find somebody who you can learn from and ask questions from, and really understand how somebody does their craft to perfection, how they do what they do, and don't give up on finding out more and figuring out more and learning more and trying to improve on something. And I think you'll have great success just by learning from others, by watching, collaborating, and being a great communicator in whatever you're trying to get into, whatever you think your career path is going to be.